Above, a figure stepped into the light, standing on the edge of the rock ledge. It was the woman from the tavern in Thorn. The dark, snaking facial tattoos crawling over her cheekbones, the large falchion dripping black blood held within likewise tattooed hands. On both sides of her stood figures wreathed in vivid red robes, their faces hooded and shadowed.
See what has transpired.
The woman's voice boomed around the cavern, causing Janessin to drop to his knees, quivering.
How disappointing. The summoning is a failure.
Her eyes traveled over the three heroes, then lingered on Janessin.
How sweet to have shed the blood of this one, too.
Her eyes then locked on Bruckner before darting to Nima, then to Tadalac.
You infants are involving yourselves in dangers unbefitting those so pure.
She turned, the red-robed figures in lockstep doing the same.
You would do best to go home.
And they disappeared into the swallowing dark.
Do you know that woman, Your Majesty?
The king started and looked up at him, still shaken, and blurted out.
Who, me? Why, I've never seen the beastly creature. Now quick, we must away and back to Amenia.
Tadalac tugged on the hem of Bruckner's shirt and whispered to him. This is the king, Ox? He's not very impressive, is he?
I think we should return. The king and I are both hurt, and all of us need rest. We also promised to help that old gnome out of here.
Nima looked on the fat, shivering monarch and murmured to Bruckner.
Personally, I'm inclined to helping only the old merchant and leaving this ungrateful old sod behind. But I suppose the king might become more generous when he gets his wits back. Also, one of us should probably try pumping him for information, maybe after we've had a chance to rest.
Tadalac, you should see to the king's wounds,
Bruckner said, and the gnome nodded. It'll spend the last of the healer's wand, but I suppose we must. Bruckner made a swift sweep of the room, finding little of interest beyond the dagger dropped by the succubus, as well as a small, locked chest set against a far wall. Nima, meanwhile, perused the bodies of the deceased. She found a bag containing many fine platinum coins on the succubus. The witch woman was also wearing 2 gold bangles set with fine-cut gemstones. The charred swordsman left behind a singed set of steel plate armor, and the spindle-legged devil wore what looked to be a necklace made of human teeth. The figure who had been painting the elaborate symbol on the floor wore a golden ring set with a red stone, but had nothing else of value.
Do you want to try to open the locked chest? I'm wary about taking a weapon from the succubus, which is likely to be evil or cursed. The armor is no use to us.
Bruckner pocketed the toothed necklace, saying,
I will bury this once we are out of this unholy place. I think we should split the coins between us, and give some to the gnome.
Nima nodded vaguely at Bruckner's suggestions, unconsciously reaching for the necklace of teeth. When he announced his intention of burying the find, she made a show of not having noticed it, and took instead the golden ring.
What do you make of this?
She asked Tadalac, tossing him the golden band.
These look expensive,
she said, pocketing the succubus's bangles.
Does this mean something to you?
Bruckner asked Nima, holding out the toothed necklace. She gave Bruckner an embarrassed smile.
My first instinct was that it would serve well as a trophy to inspire fear in my enemies. But that instinct was the result of certain tendencies of mine that I think I would like to unlearn. So I will follow your example and eschew this ornament.
Nima picked up the long, cruel dagger that the succubus had wielded.
What of this knife?
She asked Tadalac. This dagger is filled with evil magic, little sister. I don't think we should use it. With that, he unceremoniously tossed it over his shoulder. It clanged loudly to the ground. He next examined the ring with the red stone and said, This has some sort of magic in it, and it doesn't seem evil, but I can't tell what it does. When we rest, I'll prepare a spell to determine its secrets. Nima attempted to open the lock on the small chest. The mechanism was too complex, and her picking skills failed her. Tadalac, meanwhile, was studying the pattern on the floor that had been painted by the man Nima took out with her crossbow. This is a devil symbol, he announced. They were going to kill you, he said, pointing to the king, probably in order to summon some dark and terrible things. They say there's power in a king's blood. King Janessin looked flustered and pulled his robe more tightly around him.
Get me out of here before more of them arrive!
Guarding the shaken and exhausted monarch, the three headed back to the Ur-Gnome's cavern. He sat still right where they had left him, reading through a heavy and aged tome. His face cracked into a wide smile of relief when he saw the group, though it darkened at the sight of the king. He beckoned Bruckner and Nima over. Janessin, meanwhile, was settling himself down, puffing mightily after the long walk through the twisting caverns. Quietly, the ancient underdweller said,
"That one was with the devils. I saw him myself. He was entranced by a terrible succubus, obviously taken with disgusting lust for her. I think he is an enemy. Why is it that you have let him live?"
He was under the demon's spell. The demon is dead now, and he is free of her. If there is anything else for which he has to answer, that is not for us to determine. How can we best return you to your people?
The old gnome appeared partially pacified by Bruckner's answer, but he kept a wary eye on King Hector all the same. At the mention of his people, he sighed, a great, sad sigh.
"My people here are all dead,"
he said in a hollow voice.
"I will come with you back to your town, and from there try and strike southward to the lands beneath the Loverthor Mountains, where I have some distant kin. That is, if you will allow me to accompany you a short way on your journey. I fear I am too old and frail to make it on my own."
The group assured him that he would be welcome. They bedded down, Bruckner volunteering to take first watch. After what felt like only a moment of rest, the group was all jerked awake by a voice yelling,
"Bruckner, Nima, where are you two?"
A loud, boisterous bass voice it was that sounded familiar, rolling through the caverns. It sounded quite close, just perhaps 100 feet down the tunnel or so. As the voice jarred them awake, a black shape fluttered into the cavern. It was Canary, who swooped down to perch on Nima's shoulder. Bruckner stood, sword and shield ready.
Toril?
He shouted. A big, bellowing laugh erupted from down the tunnel.
"Aye, lad,"
the voice called cheerily. The laughter continued. Within a few moments he arrived in the entrance, nearly filling it with his huge frame, with 5 armed men behind him. All carried torches, and the room was suddenly filled with firelight. Toril boomed out,
"You two gave us quite a scare. We got your letter, and damned if we didn't think you were leaping into a gaping maw of death. Ha ha ha. Damn glad to see you two alive and well. And is that?"
His eyes narrowed and focused on Tadalac. The little gnome, meanwhile, had been gathering himself into a crouch, and suddenly, as Toril's eyes fell upon him, launched himself at the big man and tackled him, or as near as a gnome can tackle a huge human. They both began laughing uproariously, Toril crying out,
"Ah, Tadalac, you little maniac. What in the name of all Baldric's beard are you doing with these two?"
Tadalac, panting, dropped to the ground and said, "Tadalac is keeping them safe, fatty. What are you doing here?" He patted Toril's prodigious belly, saying, "You've grown even wider since we last met." Toril roared with laughter, sending Tadalac sprawling with a playful backhand.
"Ah, you little devil,"
he crowed. Then he took in the figure of King Janessin, who was pulling himself into a corner of the cave. The huge military man grew instantly serious and turned to Bruckner and Nima, asking,
"You found him, eh?"
He signaled to his men. 2 of them leapt into action, grabbing the king and forcing him to his feet. King Hector began shrieking in protest, pitifully attempting to fight off the 2 armed men.
"Hector Janessin,
Toril stated in a stone-cold voice.
under the order of Lord General Alexander, and by the authority of the Royal Council of the Lords of Savar, I am clapping you in irons to be delivered to the Lords for trial and judgment."
The king broke down as the manacles were strapped on his wrist, and he stopped fighting. He began to weep.
"Take him back to the main camp for now. Get him some new clothes, and see that he's fed and kept safe."
The 2 men marched him out, his wails continuing to reverberate down the passageway. Toril heaved a great sigh and dropped to the ground. Only now did he notice the old gnome, to whom he bowed slightly and a bit confusedly. He turned back then to Bruckner and Nima.
"Well, you two have performed most admirably. Or should I say you 3? What happened? Tell me everything."
Bruckner told the whole tale, highlighting their gambit with the trolls and inquiring about the status of the orc army that was massing outside the mountain. He also hinted strongly that the king was, as far as they could tell, bewitched and not acting voluntarily, at which point Nima voiced a murmur of disagreement. He asked Toril if he knew anything about the identity of the woman who had killed the succubus. Toril stroked his beard as he listened to the tale, nodding occasionally. He burst out with a gleeful profanity when they told about the trolls, chuckling for a full minute afterwards. The orc army, he informed them, had been swept up by he and his men, though they had been mostly dead already, along with 3 trolls that they had discovered amongst the wreckage of the army. Toril knew nothing of any tattooed woman. When Bruckner had finished, he said,
Well, damned if you haven't had one hell of an adventure. Damn sorry I missed it, truth be told.
He pulled out a wineskin and took a long pull, then offered it to Bruckner.
Well, like I said, you two done fine. Damn fine work by the general. He'll be right pleased. He was a bit, well, dubious about you two. Said he thought your spirit was in the right place, but that you may be too inexperienced for real service. That's why he sent you on this mission. Thought it'd be a routine check of some local trouble. There was no way he could have figured this would be the spot the king had run off to. Well, he'll be right surprised, I should think. Surprised and pleased. I told him you two had fire in you.
He said loudly, thumping Bruckner hard on the arm, smiling warmly at Nima and pulling Tadalac into a half-Nelson.
I'm damn proud of all three of you.
Tadalac shot a small bolt of electricity from one of his fingers into Toral's arm, who bellowed and freed him. They both then collapsed into gales of laughter.
Oh, excellent.
Once recovered from his mirth, Toral said,
Though I gotta side with the lady here, about that so-called king. Seems to me that man weren't bewitched, except by lust. That king of ours was willing to plunge this whole region into war, 'cause he fell under the succubus spell. Damn shameful, that. Damn shameful.
He spat angrily against the wall. He stood up, stretching and yawning.
Well, I'd say you have all earned a spot of rest and a hot meal. Come on, and let's make back for camp. You're welcome to join us, old fellow.
He spoke kindly to the gnome.
You all ready to go?
The group helped the ancient gnome to pack up his belongings. They all fit somehow into a wooden basket he wore on his back that was built like a tiny armoire with leather straps for his arms. It opened up into several drawers, cabinets, and cubbyholes, which received all of his goods. Soon the heavy bags and many boxes, and even the cart itself, had been folded up tidily and stored away.
Magic is a curious thing,
he said with the barest hint of a smile. They all began the ascent out of the cave, walking somewhat stiffly and painfully from the recent battle. On their way out, Nima asked the ancient gnome his name. He gave a real smile then and said,
I am called Mordecai. And what is your name, young one?
Nima, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for the gifts.
She said awkwardly and nodded. Then she quickened her pace to catch up with Bruckner.
You seem concerned about the king. Do you really think that what happened wasn't his fault?
I don't know. Magic is strange. It can make a man do any manner of things he might not want. It can make a man want things he would not otherwise favor. It can make a man not know what he wants or what he does. Would a king harm his people? Would a king want to harm his people? Would a king act like a foolish boy over the ordinary temptations of a woman?
A good king would not, but how do we know he's a good king? Isn't it more reasonable to assume that he isn't, given that he has done these things you are pointing out?
I will not impugn the honor of a king without need. I do not know what was in the king's heart, but I know what a demon is and what magic they can do.
She thought about this, then shrugged.
Anyway, what I really wish to ask about were your plans. Upon our return, I mean. If you don't mind telling me, that is.
I will see if General Alexander has more work. If not, then the same as before, I think. I will find some way to develop my skills as a swordsman. What about you?